This is Mr. Eugene, and today I'm explaining something so simple that most people refuse to believe it. What men actually need to thrive in relationships. Not what social media claims men need. Not what modern relationship trends insist men need. What many men genuinely require in order to become the healthiest, strongest, most engaged versions of themselves. Two things: peace at home and consistent intimacy. When a man experiences both, many of the problems women commonly complain about begin improving dramatically. The distant husband becomes more engaged. The emotionally closed husband begins opening up. The unmotivated husband starts building again. The checked-out father becomes more present. The irritable husband becomes calmer and easier to live with, not because he magically became a different person overnight, but because the emotional and psychological foundation he operates from has changed. At the same time, when a man lives in constant criticism, constant conflict, emotional tension, and ongoing sexual rejection, even emotionally strong men often begin deteriorating over time. They become withdrawn, defensive, quiet, resentful, emotionally exhausted, not always because they're weak or uncaring, often because they no longer feel emotionally safe, emotionally valued, or emotionally connected inside their own home. And this is where many relationships break down completely. A lot of women believe withholding peace or intimacy will motivate a man to improve. The logic sounds reasonable on the surface. If he becomes more romantic, then I'll become affectionate. If he improves first, then I'll soften toward him. If I stay dissatisfied long enough, maybe he'll finally change. But many men do not respond to deprivation the way women expect them to. For many men, chronic rejection and constant tension don't inspire growth. They create emotional shutdown. Today, I'm breaking down why peace and intimacy matter so deeply to men, what happens psychologically when those needs are consistently met, what happens when they aren't, and why so many marriages slowly deteriorate when couples misunderstand this dynamic. Stay with me, because this explains a massive amount of male behavior in long-term relationships. What peace at home actually means. Let me define peace clearly first, because this gets misunderstood constantly. Peace does not mean no disagreement. It doesn't mean a wife never expresses concerns. It doesn't mean conflict never happens. It doesn't mean pretending problems don't exist. Healthy couples disagree sometimes. Peace means the home does not constantly feel emotionally hostile. Peace means disagreements stay respectful. Conflicts focus on solving problems instead of attacking character. Emotional tension isn't constant. Criticism isn't nonstop. And home feels emotionally safe instead of emotionally exhausting. A peaceful home is a place where a man can recover from the pressure of the outside world instead of entering another battlefield. What destroys peace? Constant criticism, frequent contempt, eye-rolling, mockery, public disrespect, daily tension, emotional unpredictability, creating conflict over everything, turning every conversation into confrontation, treating him like a problem to manage instead of a partner to build with. When these patterns become chronic, many men stop feeling emotionally safe inside their own homes. And men carry enormous pressure outside the home already. Work stress, financial pressure, competition, responsibility, performance expectations, providing for family, solving problems constantly. Most men can tolerate immense pressure from the outside world if home feels peaceful. But when home becomes another source of stress, the nervous system never recovers. He never decompresses, never fully relaxes, never emotionally resets. Over time, this affects patience, emotional regulation, motivation, health, intimacy, and overall emotional capacity. The result is a man who slowly becomes emotionally exhausted, and many women mistake emotional exhaustion for lack of love. What consistent intimacy actually means. Now let's talk about intimacy, because this is where the biggest misunderstanding happens. For many men, physical intimacy is not separate from emotional connection. It is emotional connection. This doesn't mean men are shallow. It doesn't mean men only care about sex. It means male bonding psychology often works differently from female bonding psychology. For many women, emotional connection creates desire for physical intimacy. For many men, physical intimacy strengthens emotional connection. Sex makes many men feel wanted, chosen, valued, emotionally bonded, emotionally secure, and deeply connected to their wife. And when intimacy becomes rare, mechanical, obligation-based, or consistently rejected, many men interpret that rejection emotionally, not just physically. He begins feeling undesirable, unwanted, unimportant, disconnected. This matters more than many women realize. When intimacy is healthy and consistent, bonding hormones increase, emotional openness increases, affection increases, patience increases, emotional investment increases. Many men become calmer, warmer, more generous, more attentive, and more emotionally available when intimacy is strong. Not because sex magically solves everything, but because emotional connection is being reinforced instead of slowly deteriorating. What happens when men experience both? When a man consistently experiences peace and intimacy, something important often happens psychologically. His emotional defenses begin lowering. He becomes more productive because his emotional energy isn't constantly being drained by conflict. He becomes more emotionally open because he feels emotionally safe. He becomes more affectionate because affection feels reciprocated instead of rejected. He becomes more motivated because he feels appreciated instead of constantly criticized. He becomes more engaged with family because home becomes emotionally rewarding instead of emotionally exhausting. Many women complain, he's emotionally unavailable, he never opens up, he's always distant, he's unmotivated, he doesn't help, he stopped being romantic. Sometimes those complaints are absolutely valid, but sometimes those behaviors are symptoms of long-term emotional depletion inside the relationship itself. A man who feels respected, desired, appreciated, and emotionally safe will usually bring far more energy into the relationship than a man who feels constantly criticized, rejected, or emotionally unwanted. What happens when men don't experience them? Now let's look at the opposite. When peace disappears and intimacy collapses, many men begin deteriorating in predictable ways. He becomes emotionally withdrawn. Because vulnerability no longer feels safe, he becomes defensive. Because every interaction feels like criticism, he becomes less motivated. Because emotionally, he no longer feels rewarded inside the relationship, he becomes resentful. Because he feels unwanted while still carrying heavy responsibilities, he becomes emotionally numb. Because chronic emotional pain eventually becomes emotional shutdown. This is where many marriages slowly die. Not through one giant explosion, but through years of emotional depletion. And this is important. A man's deterioration does not remove his responsibility for his own behavior. Men are still accountable for laziness, cruelty, infidelity, irresponsibility, emotional immaturity, or destructive choices. But relationships are ecosystems, and unhealthy environments change people over time. The massive misunderstanding about withholding. One of the biggest mistakes couples make is believing deprivation creates transformation. A wife thinks, if I withdraw intimacy, maybe he'll finally become more attentive. If I stay critical, maybe he'll improve. If I keep showing dissatisfaction, maybe he'll finally become the man I want. Short term, he may try harder temporarily, but long term, many men stop trying completely, because eventually he begins feeling, nothing I do is enough. I can't satisfy her. I always fail. I never feel wanted anyway. And once hopelessness replaces motivation, emotional withdrawal usually follows. This is why some men become passive, not because they never cared, but because emotionally they stopped believing success inside the relationship was possible. Real relationship patterns. I've seen relationships completely transform when emotional hostility decreased and intimacy improved, not because the husband became a perfect man, but because his emotional environment changed. Men who were withdrawn, distant, passive, emotionally shut down, irritable, disconnected, often became dramatically more engaged once they consistently felt respected, wanted, emotionally safe, sexually desired, and appreciated. At the same time, I've seen marriages collapse where criticism became constant, intimacy disappeared, conflict became normal, and emotional rejection lasted for years. Eventually, the husband emotionally checked out completely, and by the time the wife realized how serious the damage was, the emotional bond was already gone. Why this message makes people uncomfortable? This message makes people uncomfortable because it introduces accountability on both sides. It forces men to admit emotional withdrawal hurts marriages. Passivity hurts marriages. Shutting down hurts marriages. But it also forces women to admit constant criticism damages men. Chronic rejection damages men. Emotional hostility damages men. And intimacy deeply affects male psychology. A lot of modern relationship advice only discusses women's emotional needs while treating male emotional and physical needs as optional, shallow, or secondary. But they aren't secondary to men. For many men, peace and intimacy are emotional oxygen. Final thoughts. Most men do not need perfection. They need peace instead of constant hostility, intimacy instead of chronic rejection, respect instead of contempt, emotional safety instead of emotional warfare. When those things exist consistently, many men become more productive, more emotionally available, more romantic, more patient, more generous, more engaged, and more connected to their families. When those things disappear for years, many men deteriorate emotionally in predictable ways. This does not excuse bad behavior, it does not justify abuse, it does not remove accountability from men. But it does explain why so many marriages slowly collapse emotionally even when both people still technically love each other. Relationships are not sustained by love alone. They are sustained by emotional environment. Peace matters, intimacy matters, respect matters, feeling wanted matters. And many marriages would dramatically improve if couples understood how deeply these things affect male psychology. Drop a comment. Men, how much did peace and intimacy affect who you became inside your relationship? Women, have you ever noticed a difference in your husband when he felt consistently respected, desired, and emotionally safe? Subscribe for more honest conversations about relationship dynamics, emotional connection, and modern marriage.